Miss Patsy Cline, March 5th of 1963. That plane went down in Tennessee, killing Patsy Cline, Hawkshaw Hawkins, Cowboy Copas, and Randy Hughes. We talked with Patsy's husband, Charlie Dick, and then we'll move on to one of Patsy's friends, George Riddle. So we hope that you enjoy some of the true stories, and some of the timeline and events as we take a look at the life and times of a great legend, Miss Patsy Cline. And our guest today, Mr. Charlie Dick, the husband of the late, great Patsy Cline. Charlie, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with us about different things in Patsy Cline and yours life, and hope that we can get some truth to some of the stories that's been out through the years. So I appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Well, I wish more people would take time to ask to find out the real stuff.
Well, that's why we're here, because we believe that the true stories that are out there, people like you that have been there and done that, can give us what we need to historically keep country music alive. And I want to begin with about the first time that you laid eyes on Patsy Cline, the story that really nobody knows, if you would care to share that with us.
Well, the first time, there was back what they called it back then, when they had a minstrel show at a high school in Winchester, Virginia, where we were both from. And I was just, I don't know, I was 12, 13 years old, 14 maybe, and my buddy and I went to I don't know if somebody gave us some passes or what, but we went to see the show because we both like music.
Mm-hmm.
And she performed in that show. I didn't know who she was, but I seen her name, Virginia Hensley, but it didn't mean anything to me. But I did see her perform in that show. And then after that, I'd never seen her again until Friday the 13th, April 1956. And there was a band. I followed some of the bands in in Winchester, and went to dances. And you got to know some of the musicians. And there was one band in particular, the Country Crackers. And on Friday nights, they worked at a little town outside of Winchester called Berryville, and they played a dance. And I'd been going to the dance for some time, and Patsy, in the meantime, had left Winchester, and he got married and lives in Frederick, Maryland. And in the meantime, she got on the Jimmy Dean television show. So actually the second time I ever laid eyes on her was on TV when she was on the Jimmy Dean show. And then the band that I was going to see on Friday nights in Berryville, they hired her to work there with them on Friday nights. So I seen her there, and so one night I asked her to dance.
Mm-hmm.
And she said no, she couldn't dance while she was working. I said, well, I seen you dance a while ago. She said, well, that was my husband. I said, oh. So I backed off of that, but then a few weeks later, she showed up and he wasn't there. So I asked her to dance again, and she did, and that was the beginning of the whole deal between her and I.
How did she change her name from Virginia Patterson Hensley to Patsy Cline? Was that your idea, or? No, that was before me. Cline was her married name. Mm-hmm.
Before me. And I'm not sure, but I think somebody said, well, I took the Patterson and took Patsy, made Patsy out of it. And so he had Patsy Cline.
Did she have a lot of attention from different music A&R men at that time when you two first got together? Her voice booming the way it did. Was she starting to build attention?
She already had a recording or two when I met her then. Nothing had happened real big, but she had recorded. She had been on the Grand Ole Opry, and back then it was just radio. And I'm not sure, but if she hadn't already been there, about the time I met her, she did the Ozark Jubilee with Red Foley in Springfield, Missouri.
The movie, and I'm going to mention the movie Sweet Dreams right now, back in 1985. Jessica Lange, nominated Academy Award Best Actress. Ed Harris played you. What did you think of that movie?
Well, I tell people it's great if you like friction. Fiction.
That's exactly.
Fiction and friction.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. That's the reason why I asked that question that way is because you cannot believe everything that you read. They made a lot of money off of that movie. Ed Harris played you. But you went to the service. Patsy had started singing, and then did she drop out for just a little while, and then she kind of went back when you was drafted into the service?
No, she was still singing well, she did Jimmy Dean show, and then she got on the autography, a autography show in New York, and she won the talent show. And then for winning the show, you were given a week's work on his daily show, and but she went back half a dozen times, I guess. He liked her. And along about that time, which I'm talking now about March of '57, I got drafted in the service. And so she was still doing the Godfrey show at that time, and then I went to service in March, and we got married in September. And then she moved down to North Carolina where I was stationed. She moved to Fayetteville where I was, and we had a house down there. And she was still working some TV, the Opry and the Ozark Jubilee. But other than that, there wasn't much going on record-wise or anything else from, say, early 57. And I mean, the Godfrey show started early 57. From then until, I guess through 58. It just wasn't much happening other than the few personal appearances.
Well, Walking After Midnight, she recorded that. And did she enjoy that song? Because it looked like that they had her pulled apart. One part of Nashville wanted her to sing those beautiful performance songs, and then the other side wanted her to do. So was she kind of split apart with?
The deal on that was she was signed with 4-Star Records in California, and they immediately made a deal and leased her to Decca and recorded her here in Nashville. And at that time, the guy that owned 4-Star, he wanted to cover all bases, so he figured if he spent money to have recordings done, if they wasn't successful, he didn't want to be in a hole with his money, so he also had songwriters and he had publishing on the songs, so you had to record his songs.
Mm-hmm.
I think about 90%. So if the record didn't sell, you still got performance money off the radio station.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to record most all of his songs until 1960, I believe it was, when her contract was up. Then she went exclusive with Decca, with Owen Bradley, and then he started putting her into the more polished and the little more uptown stuff.
She knew what her path would be. She was a type of lady that knew what she wanted, and she was going to get it because from what I've seen on her career, she has inspired so many people, but yet she had the soft side where she would help out a lot of artists. She kind of conquered the country music world for females. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think she was very much doing. I mean, she didn't have total control of what she could do recording wise, but other than that, she did about what she wanted to do, and any time she made a deal, she looked it over real good in all ways, and then consequently she had some hit records, and then she was real friendly with a lot of the other female singers in and around Nashville. At that time, it was Dottie West and Loretta and people like that. And then she helped them to do more what they wanted to do and stand up for yourself and don't be smart or don't mouth off at nobody. But tell them what you think and what you want. If they tell you something that you don't like, you don't have to blow up about it, but you can tell them that's not. I'd rather be doing this, or I think this would work better, and have a conversation with these people, and they understand one another instead of just taking orders.
When she went into the studio, and we'll talk about some of the songs later, but when she was going into the studio to record, and we'll say Owen Bradley's studio, did she have a way of having how she wanted it? I mean, was there a certain thing that Patsy Cline needed to do in order to bring out that heart and that soul that her voice came out with all the time?
No, back then sometimes you had demo tapes or demo records and things like that. Sometimes the songwriters would come to the house and sing it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And she would go to the studio at times and with nothing on tape or anything, and she would just sing it, and the musicians would pick it up and go from there. And then it was just like you had your own little band. You was getting ready to go out and play a gig, and you were teaching them songs. And that's the way a lot of it happened. And her and Owen, you hear all these stories about their big fights and all that stuff. She would tell him what she thought she wanted, and he would say what he wanted. And but eventually they'd even it out, and she'd get a little bit she wanted, a little bit he wanted. It wasn't even really a big deal.
Well, she had a car crash, I think one of two, but this one here nearly killed her. Tell me about that car crash and maybe some of the events of the day, and we're going to work up to a song here in just a moment, but I just kind of was curious about that. It said that Dottie West had came down and was picking glass out of her hair. Is that true?
I don't. I've heard that, and I don't say it's not true. I don't really know. The day of the accident, her brother was in town, and they had she'd been in Virginia, and they brought her back down here. And I was working at night then, so I'd gone to work, and they went over to the Madison, which was a few miles from the house, to get groceries or something. And coming back, they hit another car head on, and her head knocked the windshield out. And then I got word, and I got to the hospital. The time I got there, they had already sewed her head up, let's say temporarily, and to keep her from bleeding to death. And she looked horrible when I seen her. And then a couple of days or a week or so later, the doctor who was when he took his training, he also had a little bit of training in the plastic surgery. So he reopened all the cuts and trimmed them up and as best he could, and re-sewed them, and consequently she never had plastic surgery. But as far as Dottie was at the hospital when I got there. Mm-hmm. And so was Benny Martin, so some other people, Billy Walker, and maybe, I don't know, a bunch of artists that already got there before I did. But as far as her, Dottie could have picked a piece of glass out of her head, I don't know.
All the entertainers of that era were very close-knit. Do you think that that's different today as it was back then? Yeah, well, I think that they a lot of them are friendly because they do a lot of big package shows. They have a lot of them there at one time, and sometimes now on a package show you might be there 2 or 3 days with rehearsals and all that stuff, which we didn't have back then. But I don't know whether they're as close at home as we were, because we back then you went on a 30-day tour, but you traveled by car. You didn't fly then. You couldn't afford it. You didn't make enough money. Mm-hmm. And usually when you got home, you wanted to stay home, except the people that you were really close with. But then when you went to the Opry, that was when you got to see, on Saturday night, that's when you got to see all your friends. You and Patsy loved each other deeper than most people love, I'm assuming.
Well, we other than being in the Army, when we had to be separated, we were never separated unless we had to be, from the day we met till the day she died.
And the reason why I asked that question, Charlie, is because I was looking at an excerpt from Harlan Howard talking about the song I Fall to Pieces. I know Harlan Howard and Hank Cochran wrote it, and I know Jan Howard did the demo for the song. I know they wrote it in the garage there in Nashville and then brought it to Patsy. He had mentioned that that song might be one of the songs that it was hard for her to record because it talked about her and you. You know, I Fall to Pieces, and I'm assuming that every time she's seen you, she loved you so much she just fell to pieces. Is that true?
I don't know about that, but it makes a good story.
Well,
I don't know. I do know that regardless of me or anything else, when she sang a song and got into it, she was actually living that song. And later in her career, when she got to cut some stuff outside of that original publishing company, one of the last albums, she did a lot of love songs and heartbreak songs and things like that, other people's hits. And at that particular time, I was working at a printing company that was 2 or 3 blocks from the recording studio. And she was recording at night. And so one night on my lunch break, I ran over to the studio just to drop in, see what's going on, no big deal. And when you walked in the back door of the studio, you went by the control room. In other words, the people in the control room could see you before the other people in the studio seen you. And when I come in, Owen seen me walk through the door, and he called me in the control room. And he said, "Did you and Patsy have a fight tonight or something?" I said, "Or today?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, I want you to get the hell out of here." I said, "Well, what'd I do?" He said, "You didn't do nothing, but every song she's singing, she's crying, and I don't want her to see you. It might break the mood, so you get out of here."
Oh, the producer.
So that's the first time I ever got thrown out for doing nothing.
Patsy Cline. She was a pioneer, iconic figure. Tell me about her time and your time coming up in the music business. I know I talked with Ray Walker quite a long time ago, and he said that she was a very down-to-earth person, very thrilled that she was able to purchase a house by making records. And your first house in Nashville, I bet you all really were proud to have something like that, huh?
Oh, yeah, the first one we bought, yeah, because we had rented in a couple of places before we was able to buy one, because, you know, I just gotten out of the service, and I didn't have enough money to buy a house, and of course, at that time, she didn't either. In fact, one time we had a car repossessed, and she'd had a car wreck, I had a car wreck, and we were on hard times. And in fact, the neighbors all came over and offered us stuff to help us and things like that. That was when we first came down here. But when she got that house, we was really tickled when you walk in and say, "This is our house, you know, we own this, we're going to live here," and maybe back then probably thought forever. And she was really tickled to get the house in, and plus just be able to not live high on the hog, but just live a nice life and be able to help her mother and her brother and sister and things like that, and some of her friends.
The song Crazy, Willie Nelson wrote it. As, of course, the story goes that he had tried to send it to some other people, and they said it was probably too hard to play. And Patsy had some difficulty recording that song for a period of time. Is that true?
Yeah, you know, back then you did what tickles me. I don't want to get off the subject, but today these people say, "Yeah, here's my new album. It only took me 3 months to record it." Well, Patsy recorded an album in 3 sessions. I mean, and everybody did. You had a 3-hour session. You recorded 4 songs, and so when she did Crazy, they kept doing the track over and over and over and over, and they spent the whole 3 hours on that one song and didn't get it. And one night, a couple weeks or something later, we were at the house one night, and we were playing, I think she did another session before that, we were playing some of the tapes that she had, and we had the track on Crazy, and she'd fool with it and fool with it. She just couldn't get it to come off the way she wanted to, and somebody was, I don't know now who it was, but somebody was there, some musician probably, or it might have been Randy Hughes, might have been anybody. But they said, well, you're trying to sing it like Willie. I said, forget Willie, just sing it the way you think it ought to be sang. And, you know, a light went off, and she went back into the studio, and in 2 or 3 takes they had it.
And was that you that told her that? Just sing it, Patsy,
no,
the way you sing it?
Don't think it was me. I'd like to take credit for it, but I don't think it was me. But Willie, you know, he's got a weird phrasing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's like some people say, he don't sing a song, he talks a song. But whatever he does damn good. But
yeah.
But she was singing it the way he did the demo, and he just did the demo the way that he would do it as if he was going to record it. And so then she just started singing it straight, and it came off.
It has been said, and I this is the reason, Charlie, that I ask you the way I ask you, because we refer back again to writings and notes and, you know, other things that you see on other people. And I know I don't believe you've really talked to too many people. So that's the reason why I kind of say, well, is it true? Patsy, did she feel that she might not live a long time? Did she have something maybe like that in her head, or did she just think, well, she'd live forever? Or I've seen some notes about that.
I've seen all this stuff, and I don't know if she ever had an idea she wasn't going to live long or anything like that. But you know, people have old country sayings and things like that, you know, and, well, I hope I lived till I'm big enough to do something or do this or whatever, just throw something out. And Patsy was very much on picking up on people saying things like that. And she would say them, and it was just a figure of speech. And I don't like, they said, Ray Walker said that she'd leave in the opera and said, they ain't going to take my refrigerator, they ain't going to do this, they ain't going to do that. And I've had one big accident or two, and the next one might be the last. I don't say she didn't say that, but I don't think she ever believed it.
She reacted just like any opera star that was having a great career. She was a happy lady. She was in love. You had 2 great kids. And I guess it just kind of disgusts me in a way for them to take an icon like this and make it a mystery. And why not just go right to the main person, which is you, and let them tell the story on Patsy Cline, what kind of a person that she was. She helped a lot of people, and she tried to give her heart and soul to music. And it was,
well, you know, like you're talking about a movie and things like that, that's Hollywood, and that story wouldn't sell.
Well, that's the reason why I asked you that question, you know, about the Sweet Dreams, because everything in Hollywood is Hollywood, that's for sure.
Yeah. And
I wanted to have your take on it. Did they consult you at all on that movie when they started making it?
No, I wasn't up on stuff like I am now. I hadn't been in the business taking care of myself that long. And Loretta's manager, Dave Skepner, he set that movie deal up. And what I neglected to do was get control of the script, and which I haven't done anything since. I didn't, but I didn't know enough then, or didn't think enough. And I was just glad they were going to make a film, and I thought, boy, it'll tell everything right, and it'll be great. But that ain't the way they do it in Hollywood.
Is there any part of that film that's true?
Oh, yeah, it's a lot of it's true, and some of it is just exaggerated. Like, I never rode a motorcycle home from Fort Bragg and stuff like that. I came home and when I felt like it, and just about, and I hitchhiked and all that, but I never rode a motorcycle. and just stuff like that. I don't know. They just thought it would jazz it up a little bit, I guess. And all the fights. My daughter was over here the other day, and she was on somebody because they got the fight scene in there and all like that. The whole time, one night, me and Patsy got arguing or something, and she got, she was mad at the world, I think, and it was taking it out on me, and she got hysterical almost, and I smacked her.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I never laid a hand on her in my life. And that, but you know, in the movie they got to make it look good. My daughter was telling somebody, she said, well, no bigger than I was, I'd have been over kicking him or something if he was doing that.
Well, I guess that's love and marriage, and you two had went through life together, and you loved each other dearly. You had 2 kids, and all these great things were happening. It can't be a fairy tale every day.
No, I don't think ours is a whole lot different from any other marriage.
I don't believe so. No. Who was Patsy's best friend? Was it Loretta?
Loretta was a good friend. You know, they hadn't been around that long, really, because Loretta came to town. You've seen her movie, I guess, Loretta's movie.
Coal Miner's Daughter, yes.
Yeah, and you know, it shows them, and they're going from Washington State to Nashville and stopping at every place they see a radio tower. And that's when we first met them. She was in the hospital, and I was over visiting. It was Saturday, and she said, "Well, no, if I was going downtown to the opera," and I said, "Probably." She said, "Well, find this girl and tell her I want to see her," because she'd heard Loretta talk on the radio to interview with somebody. And so I went down that night, and I went to her stuff record shop, just like in the movie, but that wasn't me in the movie.
Right.
But I did go to her stuff record shop, and I went back and found her and told her who I was. And when I told her who I was, God, I thought she was going to break my neck. She just gave me a hug, and I thought she was going to twist my head off. But I told her, Patsy, this was Saturday night, and I told her Patsy would like to meet her and talk to her, just like to see her, but she was in the hospital, and she couldn't come down. And she said, well, can I go to the hospital? I said, yeah, but I said, a little late right now. So she said, well, can I come out tomorrow? And I said, sure. So I set a date and met him at the hospital, and that's how we got to know Loretta. And that was in the summer of 59.
And then Patsy kind of took Loretta under her wing, so to speak.
Yeah, but Loretta, I believe at that time, I don't know whether they went back to Washington. I guess at least Mooney went back to Washington State and got the furniture and stuff like that. But they weren't really living here when we first met them. Because I remember after they did move here, we had moved into the new house, so that was 62. And Loretta and Mooney were living over on the other side of town. And Loretta had told Patsy she had a den downstairs similar to the one we had. And the only thing was she didn't have money yet to go buy drapes for the sliding door that went out to the patio. So Patsy went somewhere and bought a set of drapes just like to what we had at our house, because that's what Loretta was talking about. It was similar to our house. And we took them over and put them up, and Loretta just about flipped out.
Really?
And they did, and like I say, I was working in printing company. I worked at night. Now the women would come over and visit with Patsy while I was at work, so I wasn't around that much. I run around with Mooney some, Dad.
Mm-hmm. Especially if they were both out of town. Me and him would go downtown and raise a little hell or do something. But and Dottie then became good friends. Now she was here before we moved into the new house. We met her before that. She was down here visiting, and she was still out there up in I don't know where they lived, in Michigan or someplace up north of here. But they were in town, and we met them. And then Bill, her husband's mom and daddy lived here, so they moved back here, and then they started coming to the house. Tell me the surroundings in the studio in 1957, 58, 59, 1960 when you walked in. Tell me what you saw and what went on. Well,
Owen Bradley had bought an old house on 16th Avenue, and he put a studio in the basement. And then he decided he needed a bigger studio, so he put a Quonset hut on the back of the house, like they used to have in the Second World War. It's like a half a barrel to lay down flat, and that was the studio. And then when you went in, he did have some boards on the wall, up and down on a swivel. You could turn them. If you turn them completely flat, you got a real hard sound. If you open them up, let the air get in between them, you got a soft sound. And other than that, one wall had like a padded wall with a drape on it. And other than that, you had a piano and a bunch of chairs, and there was a little bit like a breakfast booth over in the corner where if any guests were there, they could sit there. But that was it. And then, of course, you had a control room. But that's all it was. And when Patsy went in, like I say before, when she didn't record, the musicians had never heard the song. Now, excuse me, at the end of her career, when they started using the strings, then you had to have an arranger that wrote it out on paper. Of course, the regular musicians couldn't read anyhow, so it didn't matter. But lots of times she'd go in there and she'd get her manager, Randy Hughes, was a rhythm player, and he'd probably been at the house, and she'd sing and he'd just play rhythm, a flat top rhythm, and then the guys would just start picking it up, and they'd fall in one at a time, and then they did come up with a number system. I don't know. I guess you know what that is.
Yes, sir, I do.
And but when we first got down here, I don't think they even had that. And then, like I say, at the end, they had lead sheets.
Well, let's talk about the end. That might be the hardest part for you. I don't know. Can you give me a series of events that took place? I know there's been some heartache about people saying Patsy's the only one that gets recognized in the plane, and of course there was Hawkshaw Hawkins and Cowboy Copas, of course Randy Hughes, the manager. We lost a ton of talented, wonderful people. But as we're focusing on Patsy, give me an idea of a couple days before she left Kansas City, and if you can, and if you would, go through the events as Charlie Dick would remember, so no one can vary from what happened.
A couple days before, she recorded. I don't have the dates on this, but I think she was still recording within the last 2 weeks before they went to Kansas City. She had a cold, and they on Saturday night, on Saturday afternoon before the Kansas City date, me and her and Randy Hughes flew to Birmingham. And there was a huge show at the Birmingham Auditorium. I can't remember how many acts was on it, but it was just a bonanza. It was just a huge show. I mean, anywhere from Jerry Lee Lewis to Grandpa Jones or Platinum Scruggs. It was every type of music that was even near country. And the show was so big that when they booked it, Randy asked for $1,000, and she had never made $1,000 on a night before. And but it was such a big show, Randy asked for $1,000, and the guy said no, and they settled on. I'm sorry, my head was right. This show was set up 2 or 3 times, and it kept getting canceled. Mm-hmm. Each time Randy went up on his. So the last time he asked for $1,000, and the guy said no, I'll give you $800. So he signed a contract for her to get $800 for that night. And we went down, and the show was, the first show was sold out, naturally, when the doors opened. And the second show was sold out almost before the first show started. And then that was it. But then there was about 1,000 people, or 800,000 people still outside.
Wow.
So they came around and asked me if they're looking for Randy, her manager. Couldn't find her and didn't see her at the time. I don't know why I was happened to be right there, but they asked me if she would do a third show. And I said, well, what about the other people? And they said, well, all of them have agreed but 2, and 2 of them have got another date they can't afford to stay. And I said, well, wait a minute. So I went and found Randy or Patsy, one or maybe both, and told them what I just told you, what they said. And they said, well, if the rest of them don't, we'll do it. So they did a third show. And then we went back to the motel. Tex Ritter rode back to the motel with us because we had an airport, a motel near the airport where we landed. And the next morning we got up and flew back to Nashville, me and Patsy and Randy. Tex went somewhere else. And we came back to Nashville. I got off the plane, and Copus and Hawkshaw was there, and I think maybe Randy's wife. There was some other people there. But anyhow, they got on a plane, and they left for Kansas City.
So before we take off out of Kansas City, Billy Walker comes into play. It's been told that he was going to be on the plane at the last minute. Can you elaborate on a little bit of that story?
Well, you know, it was a benefit show, so he wasn't making money. And originally, I think it was just Patsy and I think originally we were going to go from Birmingham, me and Patsy and Randy.
Mm-hmm.
But then Hawkshaw and Copus decided that they would go to Kansas City, so we came back here. It was only a 4-seat plane.
Mm-hmm.
So we came back here, I got off, Hawkshaw and Copus got on. And then when they got to Kansas City, Hawkshaw was so damn tall, his knees about went out and got hung in the propeller, you know. And so the story I heard is after we got to Kansas City, back Billy Walker, in the beginning, Billy Walker was going to ride with us from here too. But after Hawkshaw and Copus said they'd go, he went out and flew out to commercial because he was helping set the show up.
Mm-hmm.
So then the story I hear is after they got out there, and they were just sitting around talking, and Hawk complaining about his knees being up in the dash. And Billy said, well, here, why don't you take my commercial ticket? And Randy was managing Billy at the time, too, I believe. So why don't you take my commercial ticket, and I'll just fly back with them. In the meantime, he got word that his wife, somebody in the family had died. Or his wife's family or his family or somebody. So then Hawk said, well, no, here, you take this and go ahead and go and fly back. Because they knew then that it was rain Monday, and Randy was going to stay over. But the commercial planes could fly. It wasn't no big deal. So he gave the ticket back to Billy, and Billy flew back. So that's why Hawk was still on the plane.
So they left Kansas City, stop in Missouri, and then stop.
Yeah, they was in Kansas City. That was on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
So they stayed over Monday. And then Tuesday they got, I don't know where all they stopped or how many stops made. I think just one. Then they got to Dyersburg. And then they left from there to come here.
And caught in a storm that possibly they didn't really realize they were going to get into, I assume.
No, and you know, if you've seen the movie, they're they fly in the side of a mountain and all that.
Yeah, I
which
knew that
didn't happen.
Yeah.
And a girl sent my daughter a story she wrote for a magazine, and she was talking about all the radio chatter that they had back and forth with the airport, and then they flew in the side of a mountain. And she took every damn bit out of the movie. None of it happened. They didn't fly to the side of a mountain, number one, and Randy was, I'm sure, he was too damn busy trying to handle that plane.
Right.
I know he wasn't talking, well, that guy down at the airport said they never had no contact.
Mm-hmm. So, at the moment you heard that the plane went down, where were you? And then, moving a little bit further into, which probably would get a little bit more painful, where were you when you finally found out for sure that Patsy was gone?
Well, when we went to Birmingham, we took the kids to the babysitter. And so then Sunday, or Monday when they were, I got home Sunday, and I just hung around the house. Then Monday I went and got the kids and brought them back to the house, expecting Patsy to be home that night. And then Kathy called me, Randy's wife, about 6 or 7 o'clock that evening, and said that she had talked to him, and they were in Dyersburg, and you know the weather was bad and everything, but they was going to try to make it and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was still at the house, and well, wait a minute. No, I don't know what time. They called her, and Randy called her and told her to call the little airport where he kept his plane, and said, tell them to turn the lights on because it's going to be after dark when I get there. And she called and told me that. And so then I was at the house, and then I think they were due about 7 o'clock. And then about 8, I guess it was, then the word started getting out that the plane was late and they didn't know where it was or anything. So Hubert Long and Billy Graves, who used to be on the Jimmy Dean show with Patsy, and he used to live with us, he and Hubert and Roger Miller came over to the house. There may have been others, but I definitely remember those three. And, or maybe it was the next morning. Anyhow, I never was notified of the crash. I had one of the kids that was crying. I laid across the bed with him, had radio on, and Billy Walker walked into my bedroom. And by the time he walked in, the radio beside the bed, Grant Turner was saying that they had found a plane. There were no survivors. And then Roger and them came here, and they wanted to go down there, and I didn't. I started to go with them, but I didn't. I stayed with the kids, and then there was a picture of Roger on the front page, standing in the middle of the crash site. But that's where I was when I found out everything. And nobody ever did notify me.
Really?
Officially, no.
Why?
I mean, you know, we knew I'd been on the plane. I knew the plane could not still be in the air, and if it had been in the airport, somebody would have called. So we knew it was down. We just didn't know where we're at. And of course, we were hoping that, you know, there might be survivors. But we didn't find. I didn't know until the next morning when Grant Turner said it on the radio.
Have you ever been to the crash site?
No, my daughter's been down there, and I've got no reason not to go. I just never had a reason to go.
I understand.
But they have memorial services down there, and I think they've got a plaque down there and where it happened or something. And I mean, they've treated it right. It's not a big deal. They're not leeches.
Yeah, I understand.
But I just, I mean, I had never been to that town before, and and if I was headed that way, I might stop by there. But I just never had a reason to go down there.
You know, the Opry lost not only Cowboy Copas, Hawkshaw Hawkins, Patsy Cline, and of course Randy Hughes, manager, but another tragedy happened when Jack Angelin was killed. I mean, that was some black times for Nashville and the Opry, wasn't it? Yeah,
in fact, I think they said one of the stories was that Jack was on his way to the funeral home.
Yeah, that's the story that I'd heard through other people, that he was on his way to the funeral. Yeah, or funeral.
But I thought, the part is they're not sure whether he died from the crash or a heart attack.
Really?
That's the part they're not sure of.
Well,
and they may be sure now, but I know back at the time they didn't know for sure, and I didn't know Jack's. I know Jack's son real well now, but I didn't know him back then.
In finishing up with you, Charlie, and if you don't want to answer this, you just say, I'm not talking about it. Two things. We've talked about Patsy Cline and some of her life and the type of woman she is. Tell me about Patsy Cline from your eyes as her husband. You know, describe her in your own words. And you know, as I've asked you questions, but what do you summarize in your own mind and in your heart and in the career, music side and personal side of Patsy Cline?
Well, of course, the first thing, she was one hell of a singer. Mm-hmm. But other than that, when she was into practicing for recordings and things like that, and when she was on stage or at the opera and things like that, it was strictly music. She was all for it. But then at home later with the kids and everything, she was a regular housewife. She was as normal as anybody else could be, and if you knocked on the front door and didn't know who lived there, and she invited you in for something, you would not have any idea in the world that she was anybody other than just a regular housewife.
Is there any one thought or one memory that comes to your mind from time to time after all these years?
Well, she was, I'd say people were good to us and we had some hard times, but I found out more after she died than I knew before, but she had helped people, and most of them were people in the music business, starting in the music business. And when I say helped, I don't mean a big deal, but some of them didn't even have maybe grocery money or rent money or something. And I found out later she'd helped a lot of people out like that. And she couldn't do a lot because she didn't have a lot. Mm-hmm. But she was very generous, and she knew the kind of life that she'd had until she got into the music business, and she didn't have money to live that good. Neither did I. Until we got down here. Well, of course, I ended up with a good job down here in the printing business. But she never forgot that she never had much, and she never forgot those people over in the Hillhurst area where we lived. That we were down and out. They went around the neighborhood and took up a collection for us, and we stayed. Even though we moved, those people were our friends the time she died, and I still most of them are dead now, but I still see some of them, and she never forgot what they'd done for her. And she was a good-hearted and good old gal, good old country girl.
The life of Patsy Cline. We've been talking with Charlie Dick, her husband, for quite a while, and I've got somebody else here that Charlie recommended to come on the program and talk with us, and his name is George Riddle. Now, a lot of folks out there may not know George as well as some of the country music entertainers because he was the voice for the legendary George Jones. He worked with Bill Carlisle. He's had songs recorded by Faron Young, Tammy Wynette, Ray Charles. George Riddle has been around country music, bluegrass music, and the Grand Ole Opry for many years, and he's seen many things through his eyes. And our guest is George Riddle. Man, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Al. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure indeed to be able to sit down and talk with you and talk about country music. I've really been blessed. I've been a part of the show of 5 Country Music Hall of Famers: Johnny Cash, Don Gibson, of course, George Jones, Jumpin' Bill Carlisle, and Grandpa Jones. So I've been around some good ones.
It amazed me. I've had the opportunity to introduce Grandpa Jones on back in the latter 90s when I was in West Virginia. And what amazed me about him, George, is that when he was in his regular clothes, he was just a regular person. But when he transformed into Grandpa Jones, he was something of an entertainer.
Oh, yeah, a very good entertainer. And I'll say one thing about Grandpa Jones. He was as down-to-earth as they come. I mean, he was just a plain old country boy, and although he had great success, he made no errors. He had no errors about him. He was just Grandpa.
What about some of the other folks you worked with? Just before we get into the rest of the Patsy Cline story, I want to mention Jumpin' Bill Carlisle. His energy level was above everybody else's. Tell me a little bit about Bill Carlisle.
Bill Carlisle was like a second dad to me. I lived on his farm there in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, for several years, and kind of looked out after him and his wife Leona. And I worked the Opry with Bill for 12 years. His daughter Sheila passed away, and when she passed away, Bill did not want to hire another girl. We'd been friends a long time, so he brought me into the fold. And just another good old country boy. Him and Grandpa Jones were a lot alike. They were real good buddies, by the way.
Well, not only songs you've written for, as I'd mentioned, Faron Young, Tammy Wynette, Ray Charles, you also wrote around, 13 hits for George Jones, too?
Well, they weren't all hits, but yeah, I had about 13 releases by George. But whether they were hits or not, have George Jones do one of your songs, man, that's something else.
Yeah, I guess it would be.
Yeah.
And you've got, I know your own music. You've got some CDs out yourself, don't you?
Yeah, George was very good to me when I worked with him. As a matter of fact, I lived with him and his wife, Shirley. They're in Vidor, Texas, for about 2 years. The first 2 years I was with George, and he got me on United Artists Records. And then when he left United Artists Records, he went to Music Corps, and he took me with him to Music Corps. And then after I left George, Starday Records signed me, and I was with them a pretty good while.
Well, as we get into what I believe people have made up to be a mysterious story or life of Patsy Cline after talking with Charlie Dick and learning about who Patsy Cline was and some of the things that she did throughout her life that probably have not been written about because everybody wants that little piece of pie so they can have a little part of the mystery. What I'm actually trying to do is get the true stories and keep them true in archive so people can go back and really see that these people were had a life just like you and me, and they were trying to do something, and she very well did it, no doubt about it. I would like to talk a little bit about the day, in your own words, what you've seen, if you don't mind, from the time that it started.
March the 3rd. I got the newspaper ad right here in front of me from the Kansas City paper.
Yes, sir.
And it says, a benefit show for Cactus Jack Call. We were all doing a benefit show for his family. He was a Kansas City disc jockey, was killed in an automobile accident. So Billy Walker was very instrumental in putting the benefit show together to benefit Cactus Jack's family. In the newspaper ad here, it says Roy Acuff. Roy didn't make it. Mm-hmm. George Jones, Ralph Emery did not make it. Billy Walker, Billy was there. Cowboy Copas, Hawkshaw Hawkins, Wilmley and Stoney Cooper, Dottie West, Georgie Riddle and the Jones Boys, George McCormick and the Clinch Mountain Clan. Patsy was not in the newspaper ad because she was a last-minute addition to the show. They didn't have time to get her name in the paper.
Back in those days, it was pretty popular for an Opry cast to go to different states and do these type of benefit shows for disc jockeys or people in the record business. Am I correct on that?
That's right. Country music artists were very good about helping out other artists and other people in the business, whether it be an artist or a disc jockey or whatever. They were very good about that. And my goodness, I know some artists who were benefit crazy. I mean, you call them, they would go. We did 3 shows that day, by the way, 2 o'clock, 5:15, and 8:15. Now listen to this. This is interesting. For that great package, adults, all seats, $1.50. Children, 50, and you can get tickets at the auditorium. Ain't that something?
That is absolutely awesome.
Well, time changes everything.
Yeah, I guess it does. A show like that now would probably cost you at least $200 a ticket, I would say, wouldn't it, George?
I couldn't even think that high. I don't know.
You said Billy Walker put this together. Patsy Cline was added in at the last minute, and you were there. During this mystery, people had mentioned, Charlie Dick had mentioned to me that Patsy had had a cold during that day, and she had carried a tissue in her hand, and somebody had got a picture of her with that tissue in her hand and said, well, it must be Charlie and Patsy fighting again because she was crying. But she had a cold, didn't she?
She had a cold. She sure did. I was backstage talking, back then the artists would all get together backstage and visit. It was one big family. It's not like that this day and age. Everybody stays on their bus to showtime. But I was backstage and talking to Cowboy Copas, talking to Randy Hughes. George Jones had given me a ring, and Randy and I got to comparing rings, and he had one exactly like the one I had on that I got from Jones. And later on they found the ring in the wreckage. And Copas, I remember him, we talking to him. He he had a lady friend come backstage, one of his fans of long standing, and he was talking to her for quite a while, and then she left. Copus had tears in his eyes, and this is ironic. He said, that poor old thing going there, she's only got 6 months to live. She got cancer. And little did he know that, he just had a couple days to live. Isn't that strange?
Yeah, that is strange. It's kind of the mysterious of that day and those series of events. And I know that everybody that knew Hawkshaw Hawkins called him Hawk, because that's what Charlie called him. And I'm going to guess on this one. I knew that Jean Shepherd at that time, she was married to Hawkshaw Hawkins, and she was due to have a baby in about a month. And I would probably guess to say he was probably pretty excited about that, wasn't he?
I would think so, yes. And I didn't know Hawk all that well. I'd been around him a little bit, but he was married to Jean, and they were expecting a baby just any time, right?
Another part of the mystery, Billy Walker, was he supposed to go with them on that plane, and something happened, and him and Cowboy Copus changed positions or something?
Well, now the way I heard it, and this is just hearsay, since Hawkshaw was, him and Jean were expecting a baby, Billy knew that Hawk wanted to get back to Nashville quick, so he said, "Here, son, you just take my ticket, get on back." Now that's what I heard, and of course you can hear anything.
Oh, but, you can.
Yeah.
Was there any? And I know there's always. I hate to use the word karma, but that's the best I can come up with at the moment. Was there anything unusual about that show, or about Patsy or Hawkshaw or Cowboy Copus? I mean, did it seem kind of eerie? I guess I'm trying to get into the mystery and to the setting of that program. When they got ready to leave, did you say goodbye to them and see them go?
Well, after the third show, the radio station that sponsored the benefit, they threw a reception for us at the Townhouse Motor Hotel in Kansas City, Kansas. They threw a reception for us, and I believe just about everybody on the show were at the reception. To the best of my knowledge, I know that Patsy and I sat down on a couch, and we just sat there just relaxing, had a drink, just relaxing after 3 shows, and we talked about the shows that day just for about 30 minutes, I would say, sitting there on a couch, and and nothing was in the air that would signify that we'd never see him again. No, nothing like that.
Did you talk to Randy Hughes before they all left? Was he there?
I talked to him, Randy. I only talked to him backstage at the show. Okay. Yeah.
So, after all this took place, where were you at, George, when you heard the news? Did somebody call you, or did you hear it on radio?
No, I heard it on the radio. That was on a Sunday night when we had the reception, and George Jones and I left out the next morning, Monday morning, but we left on commercial flight, and of course Randy couldn't get his little plane out on a Monday because of bad weather. George and I flew back to Texas, and we heard Grant Turner on WSM radio tell about the crash and all.